Dr. Michael Dake. He is a professor of cardiothoracic surgery and medical director of the catheterization and angiography laboratories at Stanford Medical Center. He is widely known as an innovator of new techniques and devices in interventional medicine. Michael Dake is chief of interventional radiology at Stanford and is a major contributor to the development of vascular stent grafting. He works with a number of other new imaging and therapeutic modalities, including advanced CT and MR angiographic methods. Dr. Dake participates as a member of a number of device manufacturers' clinical advisory boards and has editorial appointments to several medical journals. Dr. Dake received his MD from Baylor College of Medicine, and he was the first to treat CCSVI in the U.S. Let's welcome Dr. Michael Dake.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here. It's a privilege, and it's a lot of fun to see a lot of familiar faces that I didn't know I'd run into when I walked in this morning. I'm going to, I always, when we do a CCSVI conference, I always look at the sort of agenda to make sure we don't overlap, and so far I think we're doing pretty good. For those of you who come after me, I apologize. For those in the audience, at least so far, we're in good shape. These are my disclosures, none of which have any, I think, relevance to what we'll be talking about today. But I have to show them because, as mentioned, I do work with a number of medical device companies. So the question is, where are we going? I think, is Jack still around, or is he? Jack?
You wanted that 1 minute.
You wanted the one, well, we should all get a 1 minute stretch here. If you want, feel free to get up at any time and walk around. But we have moved very fast, and I think Don stated that very well. I know was often reminded in CCSVI sort of what Lennon, I don't mean John Lennon, but the other Lennon said, was sometimes decades pass and nothing happens, and sometimes weeks pass and decades happen. And in CCSVI, this is really up-tempo. But we do have some real challenges in front of us. And for example, let's take a hypothetical, which I think is probably not unusual at most academic medical centers, at least in our country. If you were to go to your IRB and say you want to do a register, okay, I think that you would be met with some adversarial issues by neurologists, because obviously the Institutional Review Board wants the area of domain expertise to have a role in this. And I think most neurologists would, at this point, demand a randomized, perhaps sham-controlled clinical trial. Now, the next question is, how would you pay for that? I mean, let's say we get past the political speed bumps of actually having a neurologist be willing to work with you on this. I think that Jack is actually probably more comfortable in this area than he is with neurologists, because I know he's been banging drum, and we've been on a number of meeting schedules together, and what he says is absolutely true. He would really like other neurologists to become involved, because we need that. We desperately need that. But in terms of actually paying for a trial, obviously there's not really a device company that has a real play at this point to fund it as a means to approval for a device indication. We can't really therefore go to the FDA, who might approve it through Medicare, because most of the patients aren't even Medicare. The MS societies and others, as of yet, are waiting for the sort of, does this really exist, before even thinking about any treatments. It's a real issue, and I think I don't think we're at a tipping point yet, but going forward, this is something that we've got to break free sooner or later. And the only way it really works is if we can convince our neurological brethren, and it'll be a slow process, that it's in their interest to be authorities on this and want to be the people who really know and can either poo-poo this once and for all or say there's something here, and we'll see. But where we're going is really sort of unclear. Where I was going a weekend or so ago, I was walking through an airport, and I looked up, and this is sort of near the United ticket counter, and it says, Alda Hay Hospital runs Junus from Jupiter, or Juniper. And I kind of looked into this, and sure enough, here we had an MS patient on, and I thought, well, this is very interesting, and it is really everywhere. So what's the background that supports this association? And I will be brief because most of you in the audience are, I'm sure, well-read and informed about some of these things, but I thought for others we should just sort of trot through it at a sort of up-tempo. I usually say that background is based on 3 pillars, 2 of which I think Jack has already mentioned, and probably there's uniform agreement. MS plaques are venocentric. We see that. There's no debate. This is a fact. Blood-brain barrier breakdown certainly has a role. I think maybe not, we won't have universal affirmation of that, but I think there's general accord that that's true. Now, the new kid on the block is the one we're sort of debating now, and that's the fact that extracranial venous obstruction at some point from some etiology or cause is actually influencing these other 2. And again, we don't know if it's causal, if it's just associated, if they run hand in hand or what. But let's just go through the others. Venous plaques are venocentric. We know this. These little plaques first described by a German Rheinfleisch. If one looks carefully at pressure altered parts of the white matter, one perceives already with the naked eye, as you can see here, these little punctate foci, which indeed are blood vessels within the plaques. All this leads us to search for the primary cause of the disease in an alteration of individual vessels and their ramifications. Ramifications just means branching. And again, back in the 50s, we could see all these demyelinating plaques that seem to be venocentric. Again, this is one of many different, I think, illustrations of what others have shown through other imaging modes, what they look like in their relationship with veins. And then, of course, there were all these from Scandinavia. People would take brain slices. And I remember when I was a little kid, and of course I'm dating myself because I'm pretty old, we used to have something like this, that you put these little slides in and they project sort of like a 4-man's camera obscura onto something, and you trace these things. And that's what this woman was doing with brain slices. And you see things with a whole brain slice like this was called a key drawing, because you could see the relationship of the demyelination in black here to the ventricles, etc. And this, of course, led to Dawson finger concepts, and again, we're all familiar with this, and leads us to imaging. Once we finally got beyond the need to actually have tissue planes and specimens of autopsy, obviously imaging came to the fore. This is modern imaging. This is from NYU, 7 Tesla MR imaging. And as we go up in field strength, obviously our single noise ratio improves, and we can see with much higher resolution the actual relationship between these veins, which are these little hair-like black lines extending out, much like Dawson's fingers from the ventricle, and around them, not these veins, the yellow arrows aren't pointing to veins. The yellow arrows, if you look really carefully, are pointing to white, little sort of ovoid, elliptical, round foci that are centered on the vein. And this just, again, kind of hammers home the point that if you compare 3 Tesla, which is here, to 7 Tesla, which is here, you start to see a lot more things than you were seeing before. And obviously, 3 Tesla, I think, is kind of the legal tender now for most neuro work. Obviously, most hospitals have a 3 Tesla machine. 7 Tesla is obviously still a very investigative phenomenon, but you can see here very clearly the vein coursing directly, almost bisecting this plaque, and it's not so conspicuous on the 3 Teslas. And again, this just shows what we've known for some time. This is from Adler from Scotland, showing again here periventricular, the fact that plaque formation around the lateral ventral walls in MS has a close relationship to these terminal veins. We must mention Mark Hakey's favorite. I just saw it raise his hand. Give his attention of Tracy Putnam. And Tracy Putnam was a neurosurgeon at Boston City Hospital, and he injected dogs with an oily substance, sort of in the tortilla and other places, and then analyzed the findings. It said the similarity between such lesions that he produced and any of those seen in cases of multiple sclerosis in man is so striking that the conclusion appears almost inevitable that venular obstruction is the essential immediate antecedent to the formation of typical sclerotic plaques. Now that sounds pretty good, but a lot of people didn't agree with it. A lot of neuropathologists, a lot of neurologists, well, this looks nothing like that. What, you know? And so again, there's always been a debate. There's always 2 sides. It's a 2-way street. And eventually Tracy Putnam had to